Hello everyone, this is Svetlana. Today I want to share a card featuring a new Altenew Beauty flower of September, Anemone Coronaria. This set has 2 flowers and several leaves. Each element has an outline stamp, which can be used for coloring, heat embossing, or just basic stamping. And there is also one stamp for each element that can be used to add some shading. Inside of the stamp set packaging, there is a 3-folded insert with the layering guide as well as several examples of how this set can be used. And also there is a set of the coordinating dies which the stamp set is bundled with. Nowadays, coloring of stamped images is very popular in card making. I personally don't really follow this trend. I find myself more often choosing stamping for my cards, as I'm an ink junkie and love good old stamping. However, for this card I decided to go with watercoloring, mainly because I wanted to play more with the recently released watercolor set from Altenew. First I will be water embossing several flowers onto a watercolor paper. And here is my doggy decided to make a special appearance. She likes laying next to me when I make cards or filming a video, apparently. And sometimes just laying aside is not enough, and she comes to my working surface demanding to be petted. She's obviously the neediest dog in the world. Okay, so as I said, I will be white embossing several flowers onto a watercolor paper. I'm using a Strathmore watercolor paper of 140 pounds. And now I'm stamping the first flower with Altenew Embossing Ink. This time I don't care about applying an anti-static powder, as I don't need my embossing to be very precise and clean. So now I stamped the flower, added embossing powder and heat setting it. After wet embossing, I'm moving on to coloring the image. First I'm mounting the panel onto a board using painter's tape sticky rolls. I've shared in one of my previous videos how I make them. I will color the petals of this flower in combination of pink and mint, using Mountain Mist and Pink Diamond watercolor pens. Here I have a bowl with just clean water, and also have this thingy. It's a broken ink Daubers storage box. Now I'm using it when working with liquid color mediums. Like here I used several wells to pour Altenew ink sprays into when was coloring with them. So now I'm pouring water in several cells or wells of this storage box, and I will be using them as small rinsing water tanks dedicated for different colors. And also I have a stack of paper towels for some blotting needs. And actually I like holding one towel in my hand for some immediate or impromptu blotting needs. I will be working one petal at a time. First I am wetting a petal with clear water. I'm not adding a lot of water here. I don't want the watercolors to be too runny. I want to have some control over the paint. Next I'm picking up the Mountain Mist color and dropping it onto the petal bottom. I'm rinsing the brush first in one of the wells, and going forward it will be used for rinsing from this color. Next I'm wiping it off against the paper towel to remove a possible left mint paint. I'm wetting my brush again in clear water, and this time I'm picking up the pink diamond paint, which I'm dropping onto the petal tip. And this time I'm using another well to rinse my brush. Now I'm picking up a bit of clear water and using it to help the paint move. I'm using a very small amount of water. I want these two colors rather kiss than mix. They are complementary colors, and mixed together can create an unattractive muddy color. Next I'm doing this thing I probably do most often when watercolor. I'm adding some color to the petal when I feel I want a bit more color. And if I feel the color is too intense, I'm removing some with a paper towel. And of course, this very moment when I'm doing voiceover, my dog decided to start digging into her bed. Those rustling sounds that you could hear before, it was her. Now I'm moving on to another petal, and I'm zoomed in on this point so you can better see what is going on here. I had the first petal zoomed out so you can see my water setup. If I rinsed my brush in the same water from all colors, it would become muddy. I would pick up some of this muddiness with the brush and transfer it onto my coloring. Since I'm working with light colors, this added muddy shade would be noticeable. With darker colors, it probably won't be an issue, but in this case, I took an extra caution with all those separate water tanks. Now I'm continuing coloring the flower in the same manner. After I finished each petal, I'm moving to another, choosing the one that isn't located right next to that I just finished working on. I'm doing this as I don't want any paint bleeding between petals. Okay, on this point, I realized that I'm doing a lot of paper towel blotting, and it's probably a good idea to dilute paint before bringing it to the paper. Altenew watercolors are very pigmented, which is good as they will last longer. For lighter shades, you just want to dilute them with a bit of clear water. I'm using a small palette for it. I'm just picking some paint from a pan, bringing it to this palette, adding a bit of water to dilute, and then use this to color. I saw this color combination online when I was googling this flower and fall in love with this color combo. I have no idea if this color combination even exists in the real life. To tell the truth, I know next to nothing about flowers, which is a weird thing to say when you are on the Altenew design team. It's an interesting phenomenon, actually. I'm quite indifferent to flowers in the real life. As I mentioned, I know very little about them, but in card making, floral images appeal to me the most, and flower cards are my favorite to make. After finishing coloring the first layer, I will let it dry, and next I will be adding some shades using the same colors. I'm picking up a bit of diluted color from my small palette and pressing the bottom part of my brush bristles against a paper towel to soak the liquid from the brush, as I don't want it to be extremely wet. And then I'm adding shades to the petals. I'm doing this for both mint and pink parts of the petals. When I was making the first layer, I was working in wet on wet technique. Now I'm doing wet on dry coloring, which I like using when I'm adding finishing touches. For the flower center, I'm using the drag black paint, and I'm doing a very basic coloring here. Now, after my coloring is finished and dried out, I'm going ahead and will be cutting this flower with the coordinating die using Altenew Mini Blossom die cutting machine. And I wet embossed, watercolored, and cut several more flowers from this set. Next, I will be making the front panel for my card. I trimmed a panel of 3 3/4 to 5 out of watercolor paper, and now using a ruler, I'm tearing one edge. I'm doing this just to add some interest to the panel. I want to add some tint to the panel, and to do this I will be making a very light watercolor wash of the Industrial Diamond watercolor paint. First I'm wetting the panel completely with a white brush. I'm diluting the paint in my small palette and then coloring the whole panel with it. And then I'm realizing that it turned out too dark, so I'm adding more clear water to the panel to dilute the paint a bit more. And then I'm blotting it with a paper towel to make even lighter. I'm telling you, a paper towel is my major watercoloring tool. I also wet embossed and I cut several leaves from the set. Now I'm foam mounting the panel onto a white card base. I'm using a white foam panel which I cut to the size from a fan foam sheet. And I'm using a very strong double-sided adhesive tape from Be Creative for this. The strong adhesive works better with the foam, which is a porous material, and also it helps to flatten the watercolor panel, which warped a bit from water. And now I'm assembling my flower cluster. I decided not cut but speed up this part, so you can see how long did it take for me to decide on the element position. And once I made this very important decision, I'm going ahead and adhering all elements using a liquid adhesive. I also cut letters to spell word friend using Altenew Fine Alphabet die set. And I cut them out of the same watercolor paper just to have all my elements of the same texture and thickness. I sometimes can be very OCD about stuff like this. And now I will go ahead and start adhering all those letters onto the flowers. I'm using Tombow Multi-Mana liquid adhesive. It's one of my favorite adhesive to work with. But it doesn't dry clear and stays sticky after drying, which is good thing as it makes this adhesive repositionable after it dries. But also it cannot attract dust and dirt, and if have it squeezed out outside of the die cut, these areas can become dirty and sloppy looking. In order to handle this liquid glue squeezing situation, after applying the adhesive onto the die cut, I tap it against scrap paper to remove glue excess. After I placed an element onto my card, I'm pressing it down with an acrylic block. I'm doing this because I cannot trust my hands, as they can be inky or dirty or have some ink residue on them, you name it. Next I embossed a sentiment from the set onto a black stripe. I'll be popping it up onto the card, and now look at me deciding where to place it. It's a real struggle. Lastly, I added several onyx crystals to add some accents and also balance black elements on the card. I hope you like my video and find it helpful. Have a wonderful day. Bye.